and good afternoon. My name is Derek Olson. I'm the president of World Oregon, and it's wonderful to have you here this afternoon for our lunchtime program on Argentina. And I will introduce the program and our distinguished speaker in just 1 minute. First, just a few ground rules for those of you who haven't been in a World Oregon webinar in a little bit. This is a webinar that is brought to you by World Oregon. It's free for all registrants, although we thank you, those of you who are members or donors, for helping making this possible. I'll post a link in the chat for those of you who may be interested in becoming a member. This will be last for approximately an hour, and we have it'll be up on YouTube. We are recording this for posterity. If you have questions later for the speaker, please post them in the Q&A function of Zoom. The chat, again, is where we'll post links from the author, the expert, or from my colleague, Tim DeRoche, who'll be managing the Q&A, our director of programs. So please, when you have questions, post them in the Q&A. It makes it much easier to manage. We're excited because in addition to this program next week, we have a really big program coming up next week, which is Mahsa Linejad. Wind in My Hair is what we're calling it. That's the name of her book. She is an Iranian-American journalist and gender rights activist talking about the fight for women, life, freedom in Iran. That is a really big event for us at the Alberta Rose Theater, December 12th at 7 p.m. I'm just posted in the chat the link to how to buy tickets from the Alberta Rose Theater. Again, that is on December 12th, 7 p.m. At the Alberta Rose Theater. We're really excited about that. She's been on 60 Minutes recently and one of the Time Women of the Year, just a really riveting speaker. So now to today's program. Today's program is about what is next for Argentina with Javier Milei, who as president, and as I was just recently informed, as an Italian surname. Thus, for those of you who speak some Spanish like I do, might throw you a curveball, but he is recently elected as president-elect of Argentina, the right-wing populist leader. And we're honored today to have Professor Leopoldo Rodríguez from Portland State University speaking on the election and what's might be coming. He's an associate professor in the Department of Politics and International Affairs at Portland State University and focuses on the political economy of development in Latin America. And he lives part of the year in Argentina. In fact, he grew up, as his bio says, both in Buenos Aires and Mexico City, and later went to the University of Texas, Austin, where he got his PhD. And has been a partner of ours at Portland State University for many years. And it's really honored to have not only an expert in the field, but someone who spends a great deal of time in Argentina, so has on-the-ground experience. Without further ado, Professor Rodríguez, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, Derek and Tim. It's a pleasure. Let me share with you a PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared for this purpose. What we want to understand, I suppose, is what is next for Argentina with this elected president who will actually take office on Sunday, December 10th. He won the runoff, a presidential runoff, with 55.4% of the vote, giving him a very large victory, 11 points over his runoff. The other candidate, Sergio Massa, who was Minister of Finance at the time of the election. The context, we need to understand a little bit the context of how Milei was elected. Annual inflation was running around 150% when the election took place. It has been rising for the last two presidential terms. The presidential term that ended in 2015 closed with an inflation rate of 27%. In 2019, 4 years later, Mauricio Macri was the president and had reached an inflation of 54% when he left office. And the administration of Alberto Fernandez that closed in 2023 is closing now. It will close on Sunday. The inflation reached about 140%. That's still to be seen exactly what it's going to reach this year. So both administrations of the Macri presidency and his party, Juntos por el Cambio, it's an alliance of parties actually, was discredited because of the poor performance. Basically, not only was the inflation double from the previous administration, but it actually had very high levels of unemployment, and also it took an enormous debt with the IMF. Argentina had paid off its IMF debt back in 2006, and during the Macri presidency, there was a new debt taken for about $47 billion. The party that is still in power today, about to leave power, Unión por la Patria, with Alberto Fernández, also had a fairly bad performance, partly because of COVID and the lockdown that it was imposed for health reasons, but also because of the very high levels of inflation it has reached, as I mentioned earlier. On the other side, Kirchnerismo, which is part of the Unión por la Patria party alliance, was tarnished over the last decade or so by corruption, accusations of corruption that were augmented and played out by the media and the judicial system. So there was no clear party or political sector to choose, and then these conditions and this election, this presidential election. So there was a profound desire for change. The main political proposals were discredited, and this opened the doors for new players like Javier Milei. There's really high expectations that radical change, like the one Milei has proposed, will bring about the necessary change. And this is particularly true among young voters that have not lived through the military dictatorship of the 1970s or through the more chaotic moments of the Argentine economy in the 2001 crisis, for example. So in that context, let's talk about a little bit more who is Javier Milei. He's a self-described anarcho-capitalist. He's an economist by training, but he was also a rock band member, a TV show guest, and a radio show host. So he becomes a well-known figure in Argentina, a bit of a celebrity through his exposure, the exposure of his views in TV show, political TV shows. He founded La Libertad Avanza, which means freedom advances, the party that he ran with in 2021, so it's a very recent party. And he was elected to Congress shortly before he founded that party in 2021. So he's new to politics. In fact, he's one of the biggest attractions for many people is that he calls the politicians in Argentina a caste, a political caste that he comes to get rid of. He raffled his congressional salary. When he was in Congress every month, he would have a raffle. And he only had 48% of attendance to the sessions where there were votes to be taken in Congress, and only recently proposed a bill in support of Israel. So he didn't propose legislation that is particularly relevant to the people. I think this shows a little bit of his disdain for the political process. So what were his proposals during his campaign? He proposed to adopt the US dollar as a legal tender for Argentina. He proposed to close the central bank. He proposed the Plan Motosierra or chainsaw plan, where he would cut government expenditures by 15% on his first year in government. To do this, he would eliminate the federal funds that go to the provinces, to the states in Argentina, eliminate energy and transportation subsidies. He will close Argentina's research and development agency, government agency called CONICET. He will privatize public enterprises and start charging tuition for public universities, which are free in Argentina. Deregulate the financial system and liberalize trade and prices. Those are among his primary economic policies that he proposed. What are some of Milei's comments? Because people have made a lot, there has been a lot of attention to what he has said and how he says things, because he tends to explode a little bit in in public scenes and say things that are very strongly. So I have a few quotes here that I will read. These are things that he has said. We will live with inflation because no one wants that repugnant piece of paper, referring to the Argentine peso, because it is the currency that is emitted by the Argentine politician. That piece of paper is not worth excrement. It is not good even as fertilizer. The first thing, sorry. I don't know what I did here. Okay. The first thing I am going to do to the silly, parasitic, and useless political caste is what I am not going to do. I will never go against private property. I will never go against freedom. I will never raise a tax. I will never create new taxes. Social justice is unjust because it implies unequal treatment by the law and comes after a theft. The theft being, he's referring to taxes. They fear the model of liberty because it is a model that ends with the theft of the thieving politicians, the grafting entrepreneurs, and the union leaders that sell the workers. For me, the state is an enemy, and politicians are those who live off the state. A firm can contaminate water as much as it wants. The problem is that there are no property rights over water. The sale of human organs is another market. So this gives you an idea, more or less, of some of his positions on a number of issues of importance to the Argentine population. Now, much has been done about Milei's similarities with Donald Trump, President Donald Trump in the United States, and President Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil. So I decided to include a little bit of a comparison between the two. Both have been considered right-wing populists with authoritarian tendencies. There's an anti-politics rhetoric in Milei, lashing out at politicians and political parties as corrupt. Milei considers all politicians a parasitic caste. This is comparable to Trump's drain the swamp. Milei uses incendiary language and hurls insults at anyone who disagrees with him. Rhetoric is full of hatred and appeals to angry voters. We can compare this to much of Trump's presidency. Milei refers back to the fictional golden laissez-faire past when Argentina was supposed to be among the richest nations. We can compare this to Trump's Make America Great Again. He considers climate change that is not the result of human actions. We can compare this to Trump's climate stance. He opposed the government's COVID lockdown. We compare that to Trump's COVID response. And he opposes abortion and seeks to call a referendum on its recent legalization. So these are some of the ways in which both the Milei seems to take some of the policies or imitate some of the policies that Trump has followed, or positions that Trump has had. But Milei lost the first round. In Argentina, there's a system where there's many parties. So you have to win in the election, the presidential election, you have to win 45% of the vote, or at least 40% with a 10-point lead over the person next to you. And this was a five candidates election. You had Sergio Massa, Minister of Finance, because of this high inflation played against him. You had Javier Milei with the new party, and then you had the party, Juntos por el Cambio, the alliance of parties, that was guided by Mauricio Macri, previous president. He could not run because his popularity was so low, but one of his closest allies in the party, Patricia Bullrich, ran for the party, as the candidate for the party. Then you had Schiaretti, who was a politician from a provincial party that received a significant share of the vote, and the left, the sort of socialist left, received a lot less, but it was present in the election. Now, Milei didn't win the first election. Actually, the Minister of Finance, surprising everybody, had the most votes in that election. But he went to a runoff on November 19th. Macri, who, as I said, is one of the leaders of the Juntos por el Cambio. You can see him here in a picture sitting with Milei and candidate Patricia Bullrich, who came in third place. 24 hours after the election, Macri called both Milei and Bullrich to a meeting at his home. And what happened is that they ended up endorsing Milei. As a result of that endorsement, largely, partly at least as a result of that endorsement, Milei received the most votes in the runoff and won the presidency, as I said, by 55% of the votes, over 44 of candidate Massa. Now, the big question becomes, can Milei govern effectively? La Libertad Avanza, his party, has no mayors, no governors, and because of the success in the recent elections, has 38 representatives in the lower house of Congress, but that's 38 of 257. Also in the Senate has 8 out of 72 senators. So they are very far from being able to pass legislation on their own. Most likely, Milei will make extensive use of presidential decrees. Probably will try to get the support of Juntos por el Cambio representatives and senators, but also he will try to get, he will have to use presidential decrees. But even the presidential decrees require the approval in one of the two chambers within 30 days of the decree to be valid. So he's going to have to look for allies in Juntos por el Cambio, or Hacemos por Nuestro País, the party that basically has the province of Córdoba backing. One thing he is likely to also use is control over federal funds to convince governors of the provinces to put pressure or to look at his legislative agenda with more positive eyes, and therefore get some votes in Congress. So there's a question as to how government will work under Milei, but it's not going to be able to do much unless he gets the support from these two other parties. Who is in his cabinet right now? Well, because the party is new and mostly people from outside politics, they lack experience in government. He has named a few leaders of the Juntos por el Cambio, of the party that came out third in the runoff, in the election. One of them is Toto Caputo, who is being named Minister of Finance. He was the Minister of Finance under the administration of Mauricio Macri. He was also president of the central bank under the administration of Mauricio Macri. After being Minister of Finance, he became president of central bank. So this is a Macri person in the cabinet, in the economic cabinet. Then he named Patricia Bullrich, the candidate that came third in the election, as Minister of Security. These two are people close to Macri's party, the PRO, a member of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition. And then third person from the opposition is Luis Petri, who was named Minister of Defense. He comes from the UCR, Unión Cívica Radical, but he's part of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition. The person that became sideline is his Vice President, Verónica Villarroel, who is a founder of the party as well. And because she wanted to, she's close to the military in Argentina, and she wanted to have the security and defense ministries, and she did not get them. So that indicates some tension probably within the Libertad Avanza party. My analysis is that by leaving security and economic affairs in the hands of leaders from other parties, he is going to be able to avoid taking responsibility for some of the outcomes of those economic policies and the social protests that will come with it, and the repression of the social protests will come with it. What is left of the proposals after he's moved so many people, especially into the economic arena from outside of his party? Well, dollarization for now is not going to take place. The central bank is not going to be closed. Milei has predicted a year and a half to 2 years of stagflation because of the cuts in government expenditures that he plans to implement. That means high inflation. Inflation will remain high, and there will be substantial unemployment during this period. He wants to privatize practically every government enterprise that remains in the hands of the government, and implement a pension system reform that would cut benefits to people that have retired. They regulate financial markets, but there's no clarity on many other proposals. It seems that the focus right now is on stabilizing the economy, and so there's not much clarity of what he plans to do with the abortion referendum, fees in universities, and some other of the policies, smaller policies that he had proposed. I've come up with 3 scenarios for the future of Argentina for this next 4 years. I'm not sure I can predict with the probability of each of these scenarios, although I think the third one is looking like the most likely at this point. The first scenario is the repetition of 2001, when the major crisis in Argentina ended up with the government falling. This scenario plays out this way. Milei passes some of the more extreme policies in Congress, particularly the economic ones. High unemployment and high inflation erode popular support for him. Milei loses the support in Congress, even of his own voters. And unions, social movements, and the opposition mobilize massive protests as inflation and unemployment continue to rise. The government uses repression against the protesters. This results in numerous deaths, and this fuels more protests and larger protests, and Milei ends up resigning. That ending is pretty much what happened with the administration of Fernando de la Rúa in 2001, December of 2001. So not a very positive scenario. Scenario 2 is, I guess I call chaos and self-coup. It's pretty much the previous scenario, but when protesters are repressed, instead of resulting in the president leaving, resigning, this actually mobilizes the support of the security forces and military behind Milei, and perhaps pro-politicians. And with that, Milei increases the repression and suspends rights and vacates Congress, and basically installs himself as soft dictator, elected dictator, if you will. Unfortunately, this is possible. Milei has made open, has reivindicated the military regime of the 1970s, saying that the human rights, the atrocities committed in terms of human rights by that government were simply excesses that took place in the context of a war. So there's a possibility he has made overtures to the military in Argentina, and although they have been largely depolitized, there is still some resentment because of the trials that continue to take place for human rights violations in that period. So scenario 3 is the most optimistic, and is one of the moderation on his part. I can see how realities of government may temper his proposals, and this allows them for these proposals to pass in Congress, so less strict government cuts, expenditure cuts, less dramatic of privatization of public enterprises, less dramatic of a cut in the pensions. Inflation will remain high for at least for a couple of years, and poverty and social discontent will increase. Social movements will certainly be out on the streets, but unions and opposition parties are likely to be able to negotiate in that context some terms that are not so bad for their constituents. So this will not be some of the massive protests that I have in the previous 2 scenarios. What happens in this context is that Milei's administration repeats to a large extent what happened during the Macri administration. Inequality continues to rise, debt continues to rise, and I don't see a very, although this is the most optimistic, I don't see a very good prognosis for such a scenario either. Now, something interesting, or I think interesting to people in the audience, would be Milei's international agenda. He originally had promised to break off relations with China because it's a communist country, with Brazil because Ignacio da Silva, Lula da Silva became president, with Russia because of Putin's aggressiveness in Ukraine. But China and Brazil are the two main trading partners of Argentina. So that is not very feasible. China is actually a very large investor in Argentina these days as well. Argentina was invited to join the BRICS recently, but Milei has said that he will decline that invitation. There's a moderating force in Diana Mondino, who has become his foreign minister, but it's not very clear exactly what she will do as foreign minister. There is, it doesn't look, definitely the position towards Brazil has been moderated. And what Milei wants to negotiate is lower external tariffs in that within that group, and perhaps push for a Mercosur EU treaty. For certain, Milei is going to seek closer relations with the US, will back US policy towards other nations in Latin America and the rest of the world. That is almost a certain outcome of his presidency. So this is pretty much what I wanted to present to you, and open it up to questions to the audience, so I can field those questions with plenty of time. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Rodriguez. This is Tim DeRoche, Director of Programs here at World Oregon. We've got some great questions coming in the Q&A. If you do have a question, please put it there, not in the chat. I love your scenarios. I love a choose your own adventure approach to looking at the world. And I think it is really interesting to look at, because scenario 1 and 2 have some similarities. I mean, of course, one ends with him quitting, one is a sort of a soft dictatorship. But scenario 3, I think, brings up some other questions, which is, in essence, we're looking at a moderated approach to what he campaigned on, and in essence, kind of a status quo. So if he is not able to get things passed without the numbers for his party, and things are not changing, and popular support is eroding, is there any fear of something like a January 6th or political violence within the country?
Yes, yes, there is, unfortunately. In fact, I think that's one of the biggest dangers. It's worth mentioning that before the runoff, a few days before the November 19th runoff, Milei spoke of fraud taking place. He said that there were signs that there was fraud being prepared by Unión por la Patria, who was a party in government, and this was all distributed with, through social media to the followers. When the polls started to show that he could win, or that it was likely, he did this when the polls were showing there was a tie. They were tied very closely, so he was claiming fraud. Then they couldn't prove it, and when the polls started to show that he probably would win the election, although these polls could not be made public because of Argentine electoral laws, that claim disappeared. So, which tells you that this type of tricks of claiming electoral fraud takes place could be used by Milei at some point or another. These are the type of things that makes me think of scenario 2, where a soft dictator is installed, that they're possible. Despite claiming to be in favor of being a libertarian, where a dictatorship is exactly the opposite of what a libertarian would want. I can see there are signs that he could attempt to intervene in such a fashion. So at January 6th, remember the January 6th event, 2020 event in the United States, was replicated by Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, with an attempt to prevent Lula da Silva from taking office. So I can definitely see somebody like Javier Milei trying to do such a thing, prevent a new elect president from taking office.
So great question here in the chat. Historically, when the political system breaks, the military steps in. So what is the relationship that Milei has with the military, and or has the military been defunded that this is no longer a threat to democracy?
It's a great question. There in Argentina, the military and the security forces have been sort of separated as much as possible, partly in response to the dictatorship of the 1970s. You have on the one hand, you have Gendarmeria, and then you have the police, the different police forces. Those are the ones that can be legally used for purposes of repressing social protest. The military is not supposed to be involved in that. It's only supposed to be engaged with foreign threats, right? However, the military in Argentina has been undergoing, since the Kirchner administration and the Supreme Court during the Kirchner administration eliminated the amnesty laws to the military, many senior military officers, most of them retired, have been facing judicial causes, and many have ended up in jail, sometimes with life sentences and so on. And of course, although society has approved of making these military men responsible for their actions, there are factions of Argentina that resent that defend the military. Milei has taken that. Milei's origins, the political party that he leads, the origins are among those people that have been defending the military. The other hand, you have Patricia Bullrich, who was Minister of Security under Macri. So again, she's repeating her role, and she had made a lot of inroads in defending the actions of Gendarmeria, which is sort of like a national police force, and the police forces on different places, defending basically acts of repression against protests and so on. So you have people in Macri's, Villarruel, Victoria Villarruel, his VP, is also somebody, actually her whole political, her whole political life, what she has done politically in the last 10 or so years, has been around defending. Her father was a military man, and he was condemned. And so you have the Vice President, Milei himself, the Minister of Security, with close ties to security forces and the military in Argentina. So it's likely that there's some likelihood, I shouldn't say likely, but there's some likelihood that these ties will be used by Milei to remain in power, either during the massive protests that are likely to happen if he implements the economic policies he has proposed, or if he gets elected out of office in 4 years.
So let's talk about China for a minute. There was a lot of hard campaigning against China's influence, which almost immediately began to soften, after the election. How much does Argentina need China at this point, and how is this going to develop?
Well, China, for example, has funded some very large infrastructure projects in Argentina. Particularly, there's a couple of them that aim at lowering Argentina's reliance on imports of energy. Argentina, in a few years back, a decade or so ago, found large oil and gas deposits in southern Argentina, Neuquén province. Argentina has a number of large rivers in the southern Patagonia as well, that can provide hydroelectric power. So the governments of Argentina, especially the Kirchner governments, sought funding, and China was the one that came with the best terms, most willing to provide the funding. So there's a large gas gasoduct and an oleoduct that is in the final stages right now, financed by China. And there is a large hydroelectric plant that dam that was also financed by China. So it has been important towards lowering Argentina's dependence on foreign energy. Furthermore, the IMF loan that was taken by the Macri administration had very significant payments due. It was renegotiated by the Alberto Fernandez administration, and so the payments were pushed backwards. But China has provided Argentina with funds to make some of those payments to the IMF, not with dollars, but it has provided them with currency that allows Argentina to make that payment. So there is a lot of reliance, financial reliance of Argentina, given that it's close. You know, the international financial markets are not so open to lend to Argentina and the current situation. The Chinese have been more open to do that. They manage these things more from a political perspective, not necessarily so much from a financial perspective. So I think the reliance of Argentina and China is important, and I don't think Javier Milei, I think from his style and a lot of things that he has said he would do, I think he's, you know, once he arrives to power, he realizes what it is like to run a country. He's facing a reality that is different than what he thought, what he promised to people that he was going to do.
So beyond, this is a question from the chat, beyond social issues like access to services and an increase of poverty, what other economic or political effects does the privatization and neoliberal policies of government agencies have?
Well, there was a very vast privatization in Argentina in the 1990s during the administration of Carlos Menem. And so we can compare some of the impacts that privatization had. We can, translate from what happened then to what may happen as this privatization proceeds. The big difference with Menem, first let me talk a little bit of what is left to privatize. In Argentina, Menem had privatized practically everything, to tell you the truth, including, for example, who would produce the passports. All the roads were basically under tolls. Had privatized all the telecommunications. All those things had been in the hands of the state, and they were privatized. One of the things that was privatized was the YPF, which is the Argentine oil company. Another one was the Argentine airline, Aerolíneas Argentinas. Another thing that was privatized was the pension plans. They had been, given fully to brokerages and so on. What happened with many of those? Well, first of all, the brokerages went bankrupt with the 2001 crisis, so the Argentine government had to take over the pension system again. Aerolíneas Argentinas had been bought by a Spanish company, and basically the Spanish company, instead of expanding and investing in the company, they started sort of like selling airplanes and trying to cash in on the assets that the company had. So in fact, Aerolíneas Argentinas lost a lot of routes and during that period. The reasons for that is probably because they found that more profitable than negotiating and dealing with pretty strong unions that the Argentine airlines have. YPF, again, I mean, also bought by a Spanish, I cannot recall the name right now, Repsol, the Spanish also energy company, had the same situation, right? Where there was no reinvestment in production, and this left Argentina, as I said, very weak in terms of the energy sector. This was all during the 90s. So the Kirchner government bought back those companies as a way of readdressing the problem. Now, what had been the effect of privatizing them during the Menem era? Another one, waterworks, like the water service in Argentina was privatized. When these multinationals take over these public enterprises, one of the first things they do is change their providers, their suppliers, from local companies that normally state agencies use to international suppliers, right? And so you start to, the ties of those companies to the local economy are severe. It makes them oftentimes more efficient, clearly, but it also causes rises in unemployment, causes rises in social strife, and so on. Now, the Argentine economy is no longer so dependent on those public enterprises. So I think Menem's privatization had an impact that was much larger because there were so many public enterprises than what the impact will be of privatizing them now. One thing that will happen, though, is that unless they can find profits out of the privatization, out of the policies that the government implements, they will not be, they'll not be willing to sustain those companies, to reinvest in them, and they will incur into capital flight and trying to get profits out rather than reinvested. And the only way they can get more profits, of course, is by actually increasing the fees that they charge. So either you would have a de-investment in those sectors of the economy with privatization because they are going to seek profits elsewhere, or they will charge higher tariffs, higher fees, which will be, making many of those services prohibitive for the Argentine population, which is undergoing such a severe crisis for so many years.
So you touched on this a little bit in terms of talking about the international relations, but I'm curious about Brazil and what this is going to do to bilateral relations with Brazil, but also this idea of threatening to pull out of Mercosur or a common market, sort of an Argexit, if you will. What is the possibility of this? What does this mean for the ease of being able to enter, reside, or work in these countries? And how would pulling out of this affect the promise to fix 150% inflation?
Well, Mercosur is and the name escapes me, but basically it's a common tariff area, right? It's more similar to the EU than NAFTA. So what Milei sees in that, the problem that he sees is that you have significant trade barriers unless you're within the Mercosur area, and even within Mercosur, there's all these different treaties that allow for certain things to happen and others not to happen. Argentina has become, well, the Argentine automotive industry, car industry, has become quite dependent of those relations with Mercosur. So Argentina's cars depend on parts from Brazil. Brazilian car manufacturers depend on parts made in Argentina. So it's difficult to untie that. But Milei wants to open up trade, and that way he thinks he will attack inflation, right? Because if the prices in Argentina are too high, then the price of foreign goods will be more competitive, and as a result, you will fight inflation with the import of goods. Now, being in Mercosur sort of forbids that a little bit because you have a common tariff to the rest of the world, and that's, I think, the problem he has with Mercosur in general. More specifically, I think he will not be actually able to make a lot of the changes that he's seeking to do with respect to Mercosur, because there is a lot of dependency of several industries. If he does, he will have a significant resistance to whatever measures he takes. But it doesn't look like Mercosur is going to be disassembled as a result of Milei's election, although that was a possibility when he was running.
Well, and back to Brazil. So they are a major trading partner. How are any of these policies, whether they're able to pass or not, going to affect relations? Because certainly you've got two very strong personalities at the helm in both of these countries.
Yeah, I think it depends to a large extent on how the foreign minister that accompanies Javier Milei, Diana Mondino, how she managed relations. I'm not sure. I don't think it has been decided who will replace the ambassador in Brazil. But my hope, although his whole campaign and his proposals are highly ideological, Milei's proposals are highly ideological, I hope that there will be, in terms of his relations, once he becomes president, in terms of relations with Brazil, they will be more on the terms of practicality, right? There will be pragmatic decisions that he will make. At the same time, it's very probable that Milei will seek closer relations with other countries in the region that have governments that are, better aligned with his view of the world. So my sense that's not a lot of countries these days in South America, but my sense is that he's going to seek greater closeness with Uruguay within the Mercosur, possibly with the president of Peru now, Bolarte. That's my sense is that he's going to move in a different, definitely with Ecuador.
So when the election happened, two things that came out were, the victory lap was going to include a visit to the US, and then the symbolic gesture of going to Israel and moving the embassy. With the news that Milei is converting to Judaism this week, what is that doing to the role of where's the Catholic Church stand in position to Milei, and also in the broader scope of South America?
First of all, one of the things that Milei did during the campaign and prior to him running for the presidency is be highly critical of Pope Francis. As you probably know, Pope Francis, an Argentine, became Pope 2013, 10 years ago or so. And so he's very much liked and loved in Argentina. But Pope Francis has taken a position against neoliberalism, against more free markets without looking at social responsibility and social outcomes of policies. And so this, of course, goes against Milei. And Milei, I think, like so many of his proposals, I think, or the things he says, he creates these polemics as a way of attracting attention. That's what got him into these TV shows that made him a minor celebrity in Argentina. His extreme positions basically were the way in which he could be, people would pay attention to him. So I think it was more of that, more of the theatrics in terms of his confrontations with the Pope. It's hard to fathom why he thought that would get him votes. But somehow he got elected despite picking a fight with Pope Francis. So I think the conversion to Judaism has to do with again positioning himself in the larger geopolitics of the world, right? He's making a strong statement. As I think I mentioned earlier, he only proposed one piece of legislation in 2 years in Congress. And this was just recently when the flare-up that we've had of the Israeli-Palestinian war with the Hamas incident and the Israel invasion of Gaza. This was his position on this, was that Argentina has to have a statement, the Congress has to make a statement in favor of Israel. So he's making he's positioning himself within the larger geopolitical game with this sort of statements in Congress, but also his conversion. I don't think at the end it matters much. Argentina, as many of you probably know, has a very large Jewish population, and has had some very terrible situations in terms of the Jewish community receiving the AMIA, which was the Jewish community, one of the Jewish community's organizations in Argentina. A bomb went off in 1994, probably detonated by Iranian operatives, but never resolved, and a bombing of the Israeli embassy. So there's a history there as well. and is and this is the complicated and confusing thing. The military in Argentina have been anti-Semitic, quite anti-Semitic for a long period of time. So him converting to Judaism, although he's close to the military and has people close to the military, he's also saying, I am not. It's probably a statement saying, I am not actually of the old military guard. I'm not interested in supporting the type of policies and attitudes that the old Argentine military had.
So, I mean, in some ways, you have to look at a lot of what he does as a little bit of theatrics, a little bit of histrionic, but so outside of the sort of the schlock and awe of what he does, what is his relationship with media and journalists? And is there any reason to fear any undue threat to freedom of expression within Argentina going forward?
That's an interesting question. Argentine media is in the hands of it's in the hands. It's widespread, but the Grupo Clarín dominates, owning cable TV, many TV stations, the main newsprint, several magazines. It dominates Argentine media, and it has been a staunch opponent. Clarín has been, the Grupo Clarín has been a staunch opponent of the Kirchners in general, I would say the Peronistas, where the Kirchners come from, and the Kirchners more specifically, for some time now, at least since 2007. It's a media that has close ties to the Mauricio Macri's party, and Milei will depend on that party, as I said, to govern, largely on them primarily to be able to govern. So my sense is that he is not going to attempt a confrontation with the media. In fact, the media created him, right, as a celebrity, as I said, and is likely to. It's very interesting because before the Macri endorsed him after the first round of elections, the media was quite critical. All media was quite critical. The Grupo Clarín and La Nación became a lot softer after the endorsement of Macri. It was like a sign that, well, we can accept this candidate despite all these things that he has said and his style of politics. So it seems to me that there will be no confrontation with the mainstream media, with the corporate media. The leftist media, there's also a public media that he wants to privatize. And so that media will probably be quite critical, but they do not dominate the airwaves or the print news in Argentina. If he does give us some sort of soft coup, then I guess all bets are off. I don't really know where the media will stand.
So we saw basically somebody taking a lot of the playbook of our former president, and I'm curious. I mean, we're going into a new year and an election cycle in this country. Are there some lessons to be gleaned from how this happened and the forces that put into play this election in Argentina that we should be thinking about in this country?
That's a tough question. The things that I reviewed with respect to Argentina are very specific to its own problems, history, political structures, right? But I think there is a larger trend that is reflected in Argentina and in the United States. And I'm going to try to say this in very vague terms because the specifics are so different. But I think that when the welfare state was eliminated, or the Keynesian state, let's say, an interventionist state was eliminated, with it, much of the ability of creating greater income equality around the world was also eliminated, or was put in the back burner. This has created growing inequality around the world. This has happened in the United States, in Europe, in Argentina, and anywhere you look. When the policies of neoliberalism, which eradicate much of Keynesian policy, redistributionary policies, when that's gone, basically inequality grows. Now, in the past, the solution was to bring back the state in one form or another, but that's also has been negated, right? In the case of Argentina and Brazil, there were attempts with Lula and the Kirchners, but those things didn't come out very well. And so when people are unhappy, are discontent with what they see coming up in their future, they start looking for change, and sometimes that change comes in the promises of solutions that have scapegoats, like it's either the immigrants in Europe usually, or the United States, or is in the case of Argentina and Milei, is in the form of politicians that are all corrupt. Although we've seen that he has sort of changed his stance on that. But this is what we call populism. This idea that you blame a particular sector or population in the country for all the problems of the country, and with that you get elected. It's basically playing on people's frustrations, the anger that comes from that frustration, and when you use that anger towards a particular group, you attract a lot of votes in the process. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. Professor Rodriguez, I want to thank you for spending your lunch hour with us and helping us get below the fold and above the crawl on the screen to really dig into an issue that in many ways has been eclipsed by everything else going on in the world, because the world is on fire, and it is often hard to remember to look at everything going on all at once in this landscape of polycrisis. And on that cheery note, I'm going to turn things back over to Derek to take us back out into the day.
Thanks, Tim. And yes, just seconding, thank you, Professor Rodriguez, for a fascinating presentation and great questions from the audience. We thank you all for joining. If you know someone who didn't get a chance to watch this, but would like to, we're going to be posting this up later this week on YouTube, on our World Organs YouTube channel. And again, we hope to see you. And I just posted a link in the chat for tickets at the conclusion of this year's International Speaker Series with Ahmadinejad on the fight for women, life, and freedom in Iran. That's December 12th at 7 p.m. So hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks again, Professor Rodriguez and our great partner at Portland State.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, the audience. Thanks.
Thank you.